Ah, well, so good noon to everybody. At the outset, it's my immense pleasure to welcome our resource person and senior professor, Professor P. Johnson, Professor in the Head, Department of Commerce and Management Studies, Director, School of Business Studies, Dean, Faculty of Management, Commerce and Management Studies, University of Calicut, Calicut University, Malappuram District, Kerala. And the portal of the Alappa University, Department of Corporate Secretaryship, School of Management, on behalf of this Department of Corporate Secretaryship and on my behalf, I extend a very hearty welcome to our resource person, this session chief guest, Professor P. Johnson, is going to teach on problems and prospects of merger and acquisition of public sector banks in India. My dear friends, so far there are different dimensions, different resource persons across the country. They spoke about the corporate restructuring, synergies, and valuations, and public sector banks, privatization scenario, etc., etc., etc. So this is a new one. What are the problems and prospects faced by public sector banks at the time of merger and acquisitions? Before that, I would like to introduce our resource person, Professor P. Johnson. His academic arena, the qualified MCon MBA, postgrad diploma in marketing management and PhD. This area is specialization for finance, HR, and marketing. Professor have rich experience, nearly 36 years of teaching and 30 years of research experience, and professor has guided nearly 20 research scholars. PhD is produced, and at present he is producing PhD for guiding 8 scholars. A professor is guided for MPhil, nearly for 15 MPhil students, and he is the author for 2 books. Professor has published research papers and articles, nearly about 140 research articles, either national and international standards. And professor have 2 major projects funded by UGC, University Grant Commission. I'm very happy to note that yes, serving coordinator, the School of Management Studies, Thrissur, Kerala, and chief coordinator of SMS, University of Calicut, as a member of National Resource Center in Commerce, same platform under MHRD projects, as a member of PG Board of Studies in Commerce, and for Sri Narayana Open University, Kollam. As a professor, have a peer review member for more than 5 journals, including 2 corpus indexed journals. Professor have adjudicated of PhD thesis in various universities, including Tamil Nadu. As a professor, serving as a resource person in the academic staff college of various universities, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. As a member of Board of Studies and academic council of various colleges, universities. So this is a small prelude about this Professor P. Johnson. He is going to deliver on the speech on problems and prospects of public sector banks for merger and acquisition of public sector banks in India. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor, for your valuable time, for spending your valuable time this on this online portal. So on the border of this Alappa University, and welcome you, sir. Now this session is handed over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your nice introduction, dear Professor. And most respected Professor C. Vedirajan, Professor and Head and Dean of the Department of Corporate Secretaryship, Alagappa University. He is the coordinator of the program, and Dr. G. Ganeshamurthy, Deputy Coordinator of the program, and most respected Registrar, Sri Professor C. Shekhar, most distinguished professors, teachers from various colleges, research colleges, MPhil students, and other ladies and gentlemen. It is in fact a privilege for me to address this academic fraternity in connection with the 5-day online FDP program on the consolidation of public sector banks in India. So this is the last day, and this is the last but one session for this 5-day program. And I hereby appreciate and acknowledge and congratulate the department for having taken the initiative along with the AICTE in organizing this 5-day online program. So, and I am also thankful to you for having invited me as a resource person also. I think the slide is visible now, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I am directly going to the presentation. See, I think almost all the participants attending this particular session have undergone various sessions handled by different experts from different discipline like academy, branch, bank, insurance sector, etc. And you are well familiarized with this terminology of consolidation of public sector banks from having these so far 12 or 13 sessions you are undergone. So with respect to my presentations, I would say that, every country's growth and development depends on how successfully the financial sector, especially the banking sector of their country functions. It serves as the center of providing finance for growth of agriculture or industry or service sectors. With respect to the banking services in India, we can find that the emergence of banking activity in the country was started in 1786 by means of formulating the maiden bank named General Bank of India. Followed by that, in 1790, Bank of Hindustan was also formulated. See, under the charter of the British East India Company, they formulated 3 more banks named Bank of Bengal, Bank of Bombay, and Bank of Madras. And these 3 banks established by the British East India Company was be merged in their 1921, and which was led to the creation and formation of the first well-known bank as Imperial Bank of India. And later on, it was renamed as SBI. So with respect to this emergence of SBI, the government of India have given lot of emphasis for starting different banks for the welfare and development of the nation on a speedy way. So on account of which, in between 1906 and 1911, number of public sector banks now we have seen are being organized or established, namely Bank of Baroda, Bank of India, Canara Bank, Central Bank of India, Corporation Bank of India, and Indian Bank. And we know our economic sector, especially the financial sector, to be more specific, the banking sector has been undergone a lot of reforms and changes due to a number of reasons, due to technological revolutions, due to the deregulation, due to liberalization or privatization. Lot of reforms have been taken place. Even before this 1991, India had been taken a lot of steps for popularizing or providing the banking services to the whole citizens of the nation. It was in this direction the first reform took place in 1969. The then Prime Minister of India, Srimati Indira Gandhi, has nationalized 14 private sector banks with having more than 50 crores of deposits. And followed by that, the second phase of nationalization took place in 1980, wherein 6 more banks were being nationalized and which were having the deposits more than 200 crores. So consequent to that, lot of changes have been taken place. And again in 2013, the government of India has formulated a particular bank named Bharatiya Mahila Bank in the 2013 to ensure the economic welfare and development of the women of the country. And later on in 2017, this Bharatiya Mahila Bank was being merged with SBI, that we can see.
Professor,
Yes.
sorry for interruption. Your PPT not visible.
It's not visible?
Yeah.
Okay, I will make it visible.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Is it visible now, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, Professor. Yes.
Yes, sir, visible now.
Yes. Good. Okay. So when we come to the matter of the public sector banks, especially with respect to the consolidation or merger and acquisition, we need to have a basic understanding as to what is the importance or relevance or rationale of these public sector banks with respect to the banking services or economic activities of the nation. See, from their 1990 onwards, say up to 2017, we can find the total amount of deposits, say accepted by the different public sector, or total public sector banks, total credit or loan granted. We can find out the CD ratio. We can find out the total number of branches and the share of public sector banks for this number of public sector banks, etc. So accordingly, we can find that in 1990, 85% of the total loans or credit granted to the nation was provided by the public sector banks, and the 70% of the total banking branches in India were accounted by these public sector banks. And with respect to 2000, we can find that the credit granted in India, totally it was more than 77% in the nation. Again in 2010 it was increased to 84. In 2015 it was reduced again to 74. 2016 70 point something. And again in 17 also, in 2017 also, it is visible that we are able to provide credit of more than 65%. And also we can make it clear that more than 65% of the total bank branches operating in the nation is under the purview of public sector banks. Therefore, the role and significance of these public sector banks cannot be underestimated. It cannot be avoided. See, the banking services of the citizens of the nation is being met by means of having the services provided by the public sector banks in India. But now, what is the position with respect to the role and contribution and significance of the public sector banks in the banking scenario of the nation? So in 2017, we can say that there were total 27 public sector banks in India. And in 2019, we could find that this 27 number reduced it to 17. And again, on the declaration of the finance minister Mrs. Sridharam, we can find that the number of public sector banks again reduced to 12 in their 2020. So why this reduction in the public sector banks in India? What are the consequences or impact of this reduction in the number of public sector banks? If it is due to consolidation or merger or acquisition, what will be the stage? Is it due to LPG? Is it due to demonetization? Is it due to digitalization? Or is it as a result of shift in the mass banking to class banking or vice versa? Or is it due to the say stringent measures of the regulatory mechanism? So how the banking services can be made available to every citizens of the nation? So earlier we were having some sort of class banking. The banking services were not being offered to each and every person residing at the rural or say marginalized group sector to us mean not reached there. On account of this nationalization, the different phases, we could see that the banking services were being made mass. That is, there was a shift from class banking to mass banking. Now, due to the emergence of LPG in 1991, followed by the demonetization or digitalization of, or on account of tightening the regulatory mechanism by the international agencies, India was also forced to go from mass banking to class banking. That means why we are forced to have, or we resorted with this merger and acquisition or consolidation of the public sector banks in our nation. So presently, the global concept or vision is to have very few smaller banks and which are operating at larger levels. Means small number of larger banks are essential to face the current situation than small banks of large numbers. So we were having lot of small banks at large numbers. The world is of the tune that we need to have a very few or small number of larger banks rather than larger number of small banks. So that is one of the reasons as to why the public sector banks in India was resolved or forced to have this merger and acquisition. Followed by that, we may say that the deregulatory mechanism, the technological advancement, the digitalization that has taken place around the world and that is changing from minute to minute also forced us to have a global player in the global banking scenario. And not only that, we know that merger and acquisition will be leading to a synergy. A synergy means 1 + 1 will be more than equal to 2. And one more reason is that in the present era of competition, the small banks were not able to withstand with the competition provided by the global banks or larger banks. And not only that, they were not able to protect the interest or safeguard the interest of the stakeholders of the bank. They were not able to follow the stringent or tighten the regulatory mechanisms that has been introduced by the international banking controlling agencies. So not only that, we need to have standardized new products tailored as per the requirement of the different segment of customers to reduce the operational expenses and to have the banking services, the untapped areas. So the major reasons of this particular, say, merger and acquisition can be made clear only after we are having the understanding as to what are the different 12 banks prevailing in India after the mega merger of 10 banks into 4 took place on 1/4/2020. So the mega 12 public sector banks prevailing at present in the nation: SBI, Punjab National Bank, Bank of Baroda, Canara Bank, Union Bank of India, Bank of India, Indian Bank, Central Bank of India, IOB, Union Bank of India, etc. And all together we can find that, say, almost, say, the number of branches take the total number of branches, all the data on say 31st March 2019. So the total number of branches of all the total public sector banks as on 31st March 2019 was 86,867. And that is being distributed. And when we come to the digitalization process, or due to the technological advancement, most of the branches in the form of brick and mortar will be vanished away, and we have given more importance or relevance for the formulation of the ATMs. Accordingly, we could find that there were total 1,30,600 total ATMs across the country under the control of the public sector banks. That's the number of branches, physical branches of public sector banks in India is 2/3 of the ATMs. It means ATMs accounts for say 150% of the total number of physical branches of public sector banks in India. And also we can find that the headquarters, say in the South India, there are only headquarters of two banks, that is one at Bangalore for Canara Bank, other at Chennai at Indian Bank. Almost all other banks headquarters are at the North India. Also with respect to the standalone profit of this net profit, one of the reasons of these mergers and acquisition is to withstand the banks in the competing situation, means the cost of funding need to be eliminated, need to be reduced. The efficiency and the working of the banks are to be enhanced. If you're considering the say standalone net profit of say the important public sector banks in India during the 2021, it is found that see there are banks named SBI, Punjab National Bank, Bank of India, Canara Bank, Indian Overseas Bank, Union Bank of India, and all together the first quarter of 2021 accounted for 6,201.01 crore rupees as the profit. And the second quarter, it increased to 6,830.18 crores. And the third quarter, it is enhanced to 7,879.1 quarter. Of these, if you find the component banks, it is very, very clear from the table that SBI is the leader in respect of the profit. Not only with respect to profit, it is the first say bank that stands in India and which has a role in the entire global banking system. So if you're considering profit, the net profit is the single important criteria that is to be considered for the justification of the public sector banks, we can say that these are the roles and positions of the different banks out of the 12 banks we made now. So also with respect to the relevance of public sector banks, see one thing we have to understand is that Indian banking sector consists of public sector bank, private sector banks, including new generation banks or old private sector banks, payment banks, local area banks. Say a lot of different types of banks are working in there. It's a mixture of the working. The banking, the entire banking sector services are being provided by all these three banks. But when we are considering the role and the importance of the public sector banks, we have to consider what is the contribution of the different banks with respect to rural lending. Which banks will be providing lending to the lending to the people of rural area or the marginalized area, and what about the CD ratio, credit deposit ratio of these public sector banks? So we have to find out that even now, after the merger and acquisition of 27 banks into now 12 banks, rural lending, major portion of the rural lending is being discharged by the public sector banks. That is, on 2012, 31st March, it was 75% of the total financial requirement of the Indian financial requirement of the Indian rural people were being met by this public sector banks. And it is in 2020, we can find that even now it accounts for 64% of the total rural lending made by the entire banking systems in our country. Also, we can find their CD ratio, credit deposit ratio, is now at 69%. So now we have an idea that this public sector banks has its own dominant role, key role in providing the banking services to the rural people even. So again, with respect to this merger and acquisition, what are the framework or regulatory frameworks which compelled the public sector banks to have the merger and acquisition, or what is called the consolidation process? So at a glance, we can say that the important regulatory mechanisms or important regulatory revisions or say changes that have been taken place and in the banking sector led to how the merger and acquisition, maybe the incidence of non-performing assets, the provisioning norms, the prudential norms, and capital adequacy norms. So as to face and counteract or compete with the tightened regulatory mechanisms, the workings of the public sector bank should be made viable, economical, and it has to follow all the rules and regulations that have been framed from time to time by the international banking institutions or agencies. So we need to have an understanding as to, an overview as to, what is the incidence of NPAs with respect to public sector banks, what are the provisional norms, and what are the prudential norms, and what are the capital adequacy norms. Say NPA, we know, non-performing assets which do not generate any income. The banks which provide loans and advances may not get back the principal or interest within the stipulated day of 90 days. And on the basis of this non-performance, the assets are being classified into standard assets, substandard assets, doubtful assets, and loss assets. Therefore, there should be corrective provisioning for meeting these non-performing assets. While the banking companies prepare their financial statements, they have to make adequate or sufficient provision. That provision to be made against the particular non-performing assets is called as a PCR ratio, provisioning coverage ratio. So that is an important one. And also the provisioning norms formulated by the international banking agencies are, say, now we have to make 100% provisions if there is any non-performing assets. So the provisioning norms with respect to non-performing assets is also tightened. And also with respect to the prudential norms. The prudential norms are the regulatory mechanisms which are formulated by the banking company to protect the interest of the shareholders, depositors, investors, or the society as a whole. So from time to time, RBI gives guidelines to the public sector banks or any type of bank as to what are the prudential norms to be provided, what are the governance measures to be implemented to protect the interest of the stakeholders. And RBI used to give these guidelines on the basis of the controls or regulations framed by the international agencies of banking company. And another important one is called the capital adequacy norms. So capital adequacy norms is the single major important criterion that has to be followed by every banking companies operating across the globe. So India is also expected to follow the regulations with respect to the capital adequacy fixed by the Basel Committee. You know, Basel committees, the Basel norms are there, Basel norm 1, Basel norm 2, Basel norm 3, like that. Basel is a headquarter, is a place in Switzerland, and this is the headquarter of the BIS, that's Bank for International Settlement. And this Bank for International Settlement for clearing the operations of the banking services between the countries or across the countries will be controlled and regulated by a committee. That committee is called the Basel Committee on Bank Supervision, BCBS. So this particular Basel Committee on bank supervision will be formulating the rules and regulations which are expected to be followed and adopted by every banking companies which are working in any nations. So with respect to different types of banks, with respect to the capital capacity or capital norms of the banking companies, every banking company has to follow or maintain the capital adequacy norm. So the first norm, Basel norm, was initiated in 1988, and accordingly, again they fixed what is called a capital adequacy ratio. That first capital adequacy ratio fixed was 8%. India adopted that Basel norm 1 in 1999, and our accepted capital adequacy ratio was fixed at 9%. And again, Basel 2 accord was also there. Capital adequacy norm 2, Basel 2. And Basel 2 has given more emphasis as to the minimum capital requirements, also to have a proper control over the supervisory reviews or internal mechanisms or internal audit that prevails in the banking company so as to control and regulate the fraudulent activities and misappropriations that has been taken place inside the bank. Followed by that, there is strict market discipline also. So with respect to this capital adequacy ratio, we need to have an understanding as to what is tier 1 capital and what is tier 2 capital. Tier 1 capital is the core capital of a company that will decide as to whether the financial health of the banking company is satisfactory or not. It is the equity contributed by the owners, including paid-up capital, statutory reserves, capital reserves, other reserves reduced by accumulated losses. And again, with respect to this risk management, the capital adequacy ratio is to be fixed. Capital adequacy ratio will be fixed by considering the risk management associated with every banking company. The risk management associated with every banking company can be classified into credit risk, market risk, and operational risk. Credit risk arises on account of lending, letters of credit, treasury operations. Market risk arises due to liquidity or interest rate or forex rate, commodity price or equity price risk, etc. And also with respect to operational risk, internal control, corporate governance, frauds and errors. So risk management is identified, it is to be identified, that is to be measured, that is to be monitored, and that is to be controlled. So in order to have this proper risk management system, we need to have adequate capital adequacy. So capital adequacy ratio, CAR. And this capital adequacy ratio will be fixed on the basis of the classification of the assets based on the risk, like say the risk we have seen, the market risk, operational risk, etc., etc. The assets of the banking company need to be classified into different categories on the basis of the risk element. And this risk element associate the different categories of assets will be evaluated or determined by the experts, and accordingly the whole assets of any banking company across the globe is classified into 5 categories on the basis of the risk. First is the assets having 0% risk. That examples of the assets having 0% risk are cash with RBI, investment in government securities. Another category of assets is classified on the basis of risk as 10% risk-bearing assets. This is the balance with other banks. And again, the assets are classified into 20% of risk. And this is the investment made in securities by the company. And the assets are again classified into 50% risk category, which includes mortgage loans. And there are certain assets which are having 100% risk, which may arise on assets like other loans and other assets. Therefore, it is highly essential that on the basis of the risk categorization of the assets owned by a banking company, it has to determine the capital adequacy ratio. Therefore, capital adequacy ratio is nothing other than the equity that is tier 1 capital plus tier 2 capital divided by risk weighted assets multiplied by 100. Say if a banking company has a higher capital adequacy ratio, it indicates that the particular banking company is having good financial health. So operational losses of the banking company can be overcome on account of the sufficient equity it is having. Therefore, every banking company need to have the minimum stipulated, minimum standard capital adequacy ratio fixed by the BCBS or the international regulatory monitoring agencies. A bank which has a higher capital adequacy ratio says that its financial health is good in comparison to a bank with a lower capital adequacy ratio. And not only that, if a depository is having a confusion as to whether the deposits made in the banking company is safe or not or protected, it is a measure. The capital adequacy ratio is a measure from the point of view of the investors also as to whether their deposits, the banking company is safe or not. If I make an investment in a particular bank, I can compare what is the capital adequacy ratio of this banking company with that of the capital adequacy ratio of another company. Thereby, the investors can have their own choice of making the investment at a particular banks where the capital adequacy ratios will be greater. Therefore, every banking company need to have that bare minimum capital adequacy ratio fixed by the particular agencies according to the Basel norm 1, 2, 3. And this is one of the important criteria that is led to how the merger or consolidation of the public sector banks in the globe and in India particularly. And if you're computing, say this is the way as to how we can compute the capital adequacy ratio of a banking company. If you're taking an example with respect to the risk percentage of the different assets owned by a banking company, we can find that, say, the different assets given are this: cash 10 crores, government securities 15 crores, mortgage loan 20 crores, other loans 50 crores, other assets 5 crores. Their risk percentage, cash is having 0% risk, so risk weighted asset 0. Government securities 15 crores, that is also having no risk, so its risk weighted assets is also 0. Mortgage loans 20 crores, its risk is 50%. Therefore, 50% of 20 crores, 10 crores is the risk weighted assets. Other loans 50 crores, say for example. So other loans are having the risk of 100%. So the entire 50 crores is considered as a risk weighted assets. And other assets, suppose the amount is 5 crores and the risk percentage is 100%. The entire 5 crores other assets is the risk weighted assets. Accordingly, if you are taking the total risk weighted assets, we can find it as 10 crores plus 50 crores plus 5 crores, 65 crores is the total risk weighted assets out of 100 crores. And suppose the banking company is having a debt to equity ratio of 95:5, means 95:5 means 95% is borrowed capital, 5% is equity capital. Therefore, the capital adequacy ratio of this particular company will be equal to, so the equity capital, equity 5 divided by risk weighted assets 65 into 100. That means 7.69 is the capital adequacy ratio. So this is the benchmark, bare minimum standard that is to be maintained by every banking company operating in any part of the globe. And again, with respect to the Basel norm 3, third Basel norm, it has certain special, say, objectives. This particular third Basel Accord was being implemented consequent to the global financial crisis that we felt in 2008 at USA on account of the most reputed, or what is alleged, the process called securitization. And on account of the securitization, this Basel Commission realized the fact that every bank should be able to absorb or withstand the shocks which may arising on account of financial crisis or financial stress or economic crisis. So consequent to that financial crisis of 2008, the Basel Commission again made some regulations or directive as to improve the credit risk management and governance, to strengthen the bank's transparency and disclosure norms. And by the end of 2018, all banks are expected to implement this capital adequacy ratio fixed by the Basel Norm 3. Now we come to the process of merger and acquisition of public sector banks that took place in India. With respect to this merger and acquisition or consolidation, we can say that the entire process of consolidation took place under 5 phases. Phase 1 took place in 93-94, phase 2 took place in 2008, and phase 3 took place in 2017, that is the SBI one, and phase 4 that took place in 2019, and phase 5 took place on 1/4/2020, the mega merger of 4 banks, mega merger of 10 banks into 4 banks. So with respect to the phase 1 that was initiated in 1993, Bank of India merged with Punjab National Bank so as to protect the weaker banking company named, say, this particular new Bank of India merged to Punjab Bank. So Punjab Bank was this particular anchor bank, and the new Bank of India was the merged bank. And it is the second phase, State Bank of Saurashtra merged with SBI in 2008 so as to increase the global role and competence of SBI. There is a second phase merger and acquisition took place in 2008, and it is in the phase 3 SBI merger took place. See, the different state banks like State Bank of Mysore, State Bank of Hyderabad, State Bank of Travancore, State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur, State Bank of Patiala, and the Bharatiya Mahila Bank merged with the State Bank of India. So at present, SBI is the largest public sector bank in India with a business of rupees 52.65 lakh crores rupees, and SBI is the leading public sector banks in the global role. With respect to this particular merged banks, consequent to the merger and acquisitions, the parameters that have to be concentrated, or the parameters where the banking people has to give their attention to have a proper efficiency in their operation, to have a proper utilization of the resources, or to comply with the rules and regulations stipulated by the international banking agencies. The important financial parameters of the banking companies are return on assets, that is net income by total assets, return on equity, that is computed by net income divided by shareholders' equity, net margin income, NIM, that is net income minus interest expense divided by total earning assets. Then, as I told you earlier, PCR, provisioning coverage ratio, that's total provisions made for non-performing assets divided by gross non-performing assets. Then another one is called a loan to asset ratio, LAR, that is total loans divided by total assets. And another important financial parameter is CASA ratio, current account, savings account deposit to total deposits. See, a banking company can receive different types of deposits. It has to pay interest to FD or period deposit or time deposit, but with respect to savings deposit or current deposit, bank need not pay any interest. As against the current deposit, no interest is payable. As against the savings bank, meager interest of say 2 to 3% or 3 to 4% is to be payable as the interest. So if the ratio of the total current deposit and total of the savings deposit to the total deposit. That's total of current deposit plus savings deposit divided by total deposit is higher. It means the cost of funding by the banking can be reduced to a very, very great extent. Then another one we have already seen, current capital adequacy ratio. That is tier 1 capital plus tier 2 capital divided by risk weighted assets into 100. And again, we have seen non-performing assets, and the last one, CD ratio. So these are the main indicators or parameters that have to be considered by the banking people so as to say whether the banking operations of these particular banks are satisfactory or whether they can withstand with respect to the financial contingencies or emergencies or crises that take place. And with respect to the post-merger of SBI, with regard to the different selected parameters, we can find that what is the pre-merger percentage and post-merger percentage of SBI. The financial parameters, return on assets, pre-merger it was 2.23%, post-merger it is 1.96. With respect to ROE, pre-merger was 16 and post-merger 13.2. With respect to net income margin, it is 5.92 and 4.60. With respect to LAR, it was 56.80 and 60. And with respect to capital adequacy ratio, it was 18.13 and 17.26. And we come to the next phase, phase 4, that is, it took place in 2019. Bank of Baroda became the anchor bank. See, the Dena Bank and Vijaya Bank was merged with the Bank of Baroda, and whereby the particular chief minister has announced a 7,000 crores rupees towards the recapitalization of this merged anchor bank, Bank of India. And again, see, with respect to this particular bank, say where the Vijaya Bank and Dena Bank, Vijaya Bank and Dena Bank were the merged banks, and the say particular anchor bank, Bank of Baroda is the anchor bank. These are the total businesses carried on by this particular Bank of Baroda, Vijaya Bank, Dena Bank, and the merged entity. That is this is the merged entity, means Bank of Baroda after this particular consolidation took place. Just to have an idea as to what is the change that took place with respect to the total business, total advances, total deposits, domestic branches, domestic branches, employees numbers, etc., etc. Then we come to the last phase of the mega merger, that is mega merger that took place by the announcement of our Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, whereby 10 public sector banks were reduced to 4. The anchor bank, 4 anchor banks, first Punjab National Bank, the merged banks were United Bank of India, Oriental Bank of India. Again, Canara Bank was the anchor bank in which Syndicate Bank was merged. Again, Union Bank of India is the anchor bank, Andhra Bank and Corporation Bank were merged in it. And last, the 4th anchor bank is, say, Indian Bank, Allahabad Bank was merged in it. So with respect to the different merger that took place at the different phases, the capital structure or capitalization of the merged banks, the newly created banks were being infused on account of huge amounts of capital that has been provided by the government of India towards the capital. So more than 55,350 crores were being pumped into the capital of the public sector banks after the consolidation or merger and acquisition. And accordingly, the amounts pumped into this particular banks were given in this way. Punjab National Bank, 16,000 crores. Say, Union Bank of India, 11,700 crores. Bank of Baroda, 7,000. Canara Bank, 6,500. Indian Overseas Bank, 3,800. And in this way, Punjab and Sind Bank, 750 crores. So with respect to the 10 banks merged into 4, it will be nice to have an idea as to what are the capital adequacy ratio, CRAR. It is sometimes called a CRAR, capital adequacy ratio is same as that of CRAR. CRAR means capital to risk assetted assets. Ratio between capital and risk weighted assets. That's capital divided by risk weighted assets into 100. So before the merger of these three banks of, say, Punjab National Bank, Orient Bank of India, and United Bank of India, their, say, pre-merger capital adequacy ratios were 14.44, 11.54, 55, and 5.56 respectively. Now, the merged Punjab National Bank, that is Anchor Bank, has the CRAR or capital adequacy ratio of 12.63. And with respect to the Canara Bank, wherein the merged banks were Canara Bank and Syndicate Bank, the pre-merged capital adequacy ratio were 13.65 and 11.52. And now the new capital adequacy ratio of Canara Bank is 12.77%. As regards the Union Bank of India also, now the capital adequacy ratio is 11.62. So with respect to the NPAs, I told you that NPA is one of the important criteria that has been considered by the global banking institutions so as to withstand the financial or economic crisis. And accordingly, the net non-performing assets of the four anchor banks took place in the merger took place in 1/4/2020 are like this. Now, the pre-merger rate on 31/3/2020, see the percentage of net non-performing assets were this 5.8 for Punjab National Bank, see OBM of Commerce 5, United Bank of India 4.8. Now, in the net non-performing assets of Punjab National Bank is 5.39. And with respect to Canara Bank, the merger, after the merger, the total net non-performing assets ratio is 4.08, and that the Union Bank of India, it is 4.75, and with respect to Indian Bank, it's a comfortable position, that is 3.67%. Also with respect to the Punjab National Bank and other merged banks, we were given the total business, gross advances, deposits, domestic branches, capital adequacy ratio, net performing assets, etc., etc., also given. The table is given here. The same as to the Canara Bank and Syndicate Bank is also offered here. In terms of total business in crores, in terms of total gross advances, in terms of total deposits, in terms of domestic branches, in terms of CRAR or CAR, in terms of net performing assets, or in terms of employees, the position of the that's the merged banks, that is Canara Bank, Syndicate Bank, and the Anchor Bank, merged bank, Canara Bank is also given. Similarly, the status with respect to the Union Bank of India, the Anchor Bank, and the merged banks, Union Bank of India, Andhra Bank, Corporation Bank, and merged entity is also given in terms of the selected financial parameters as to total business, gross advances, deposits, domestic branches, CRAR ratio, net NPA ratio, employees, etc., etc. The same data is provided with respect to Indian Bank and Allahabad also. Indian Bank is the merged bank, and the Indian Bank is the merged bank. Allahabad Bank is also a merged bank. Now the particular anchor bank is Indian Bank. Their business is also given to us. So in this scenario, we have to understand that the government has pumped into more than 55,350 crores towards the recapitalization of the consolidated public sector banks in India. So here we have to consider an important factor as to what is the banking services that has been provided by the public sector banks after the consolidation or merger and acquisition in comparison to the other banks like private sector banks, including new generation banks or foreign banks or payment banks or say MSME banks, or local area banks, something like that. So we can find that in the 2019, there were 136,098 ATMs under the banner of the public sector banks which accounts for 67.31% of the total number of ATMs working in the nation in 1990. See, the data with respect to 2020 is the total number of, say, ATMs owned by the public sector banks, 134,863, representing 64% of the total ATMs operating in the nation. So as regards the distribution of the ATMs in the different areas of the nation, consisting of rural area, semi-urban area, or urban area, or metropolitan area, we can find that 20.35% of public sector ATMs are operating in rural area, 29.34% in semi-urban area, 28.56% urban area, and 21.75% in the metropolitan area. So one thing we have to understand is that during the 2020, out of the total network coverage of the ATM institutions in the nation, all the banking companies except the public sector banks accounts for only 36% of the ATMs, and these ATMs are also concentrated only in urban and metropolitan cities. Means none of these banks are having their say ATMs at the rural area. Therefore, even after the consolidation and merger of the public banking sector, the services that has been provided to the people at the nook and corner of the country is highly appreciable. See, with respect to the certain selected financial parameters of the mega merged banks that took place, or the mega merger took place on, say, 31st March 2000, sorry, the data is provided on 31st March 2019. So these are the financial parameters. Say total business, gross advances, deposits, CASA ratio, PCR ratio, CRAR ratio, net non-performing assets ratio, employees ratio is provided. So it is an eye-opener to us that the public sector banks which are operating under the government of India is for the service and benefit and welfare of the general people of the country. So here we have to understand as to whether this public sector banks integration or consolidation or merger and acquisition lead to how the, say, required or expected or anticipated result to withstand the competition that may arise from the globally reputed banking companies. We merged into, so 27 number of branches were reduced to 17. That 17 number of public sector banks were reduced to 12 nowadays, with a view to compete with the global banking operations spread over the different countries. So on account of this merger and acquisition, we have to think of whether these banks which were being subject to the consolidation are able to withstand or face any of the financial crisis, or able to withstand the or satisfy the global financial requirements or the regulatory mechanisms or revisions that has been suggested by the global banking agencies, including Basel, etc., etc. So accordingly, after the global financial crisis took place in 2008, the regulatory mechanisms or norms of all the banking companies operating throughout the globe were being strictly tightened. And in this way, the big banks, the greater banks at the global level, named as the global systematically important banks. These are the great banks or very big banks working at the global level so as to provide the banking services to any country which is able to withstand the financial or economic crisis that may take place. So these banks are called as GSIBs, Global Systematically Important Banks, so as to monitor whether these global systematically important banks are following or adopting the regulatory measures that has been implemented by the global banking controlling agencies. A particular board was being created known as Financial Stability Board, FSB. And not only that, nowadays, most of the global systematically important banks has a tendency towards to become smaller banks. Why? Because the total absorbing capacity, total loss absorbing capacity, TLAC, the total loss absorbing capacity for this global systematically important banks are determined from time to time based on the regulations or recommendations of the banking agencies at the global level. Now, at the on 1/19/2019, the total loss absorbing capacity of these particular banks were fixed as 16% of risk-weighted assets, means capital adequacy ratio. And again, from 1/1/22, it is 18%. Strict tightening, even for the globally reputed banks, are compelling them to reduce their operations. So it is in this background we have to understand and identify what are the problems associated with the merger and acquisitions and how this problem can be overcome. So the capital shortage and incidence of high net non-performing assets of the weaker banks are to be overcome. Why the merger and acquisition took place? So as to overcome the high incidence of NPA and the lower capital adequacy ratio and the highest cost of funding of the banks, weaker banks were being merged with, say, stronger banks. So the real problem lies that the weaker banking problems may be transmitted to the stronger banks also. What are the wrongs or mistakes that has been committed by the weaker banks may be sometimes perpetuated in the stronger bank also if we are not taking the proper corrective measures as to the procedures and formalities which are involved in the amalgamation, absorption, or merger or acquisition or consolidation took place systematically as per the vision, as per the policy, or as per the action, or as per the, say, expectation of the institutions involved in it. So it may have an adverse impact of this particular weaker banks, or the defects and demerits of the weaker bank may be transmitted to stronger bank also if we are not vigilant with respect to the process, procedures, formalities, policies, vision and mission, etc. associated with the particular merger and acquisition is correctly or strictly followed. And another important, say, reason is that we have seen that in 2017 there were 27 banks. In 19 it is reduced to 17 banks, and again in 1/1/20 it is reduced to 12 banks. Again, it may be reduced. There is every chance that, as we have seen, that globally important, globally strategic important banks are trying to reduce their scale of operation due to strict measures of the risk-weighted assets implemented 16% on 1/1/2019 and 18% from 1/1/2022. We have to think of whether these larger banks emerged on account of this consolidation process will again be reiterated or taken back. That we have to wait and see. Again, as regards the frauds that took place in the Indian banking sector, we can find that in 2017-18, altogether 2,885 frauds were taken place the public sector banks alone, which accounted for 49% of the total frauds that taken place in the banking sector of the nation. And this figure in 1819 was, see, the total frauds that took place in the public sector banks alone were 55.4%. Also, we can find that more than 90% of the total amounts involved in the fraudulent activities are represented or accounted by these public sector banks. So this is an area where even after the merger and acquisition took place, this particular fraudulent activities or misrepresentation or some other willful activities which are strictly against the banking regulations may continue unless otherwise we are very, very vigilant with respect to the transparency, governance, and other measures which are to be implemented without any compromise. The internal supervision mechanism adopted that is expected to be followed in every banking company is to be strictly ensured or adhered. There should be a close monitoring as to how the incidence of NPA can be reduced. See, with respect to the human resource management also, there is a very great problem as to the merger and acquisition, the work culture of the employees, the status and position of the employees, the promotions of the employees, the seniority of the employees, the package of the employees, the pensionary scheme of the employees of the merged banks and the anchor banks are entirely different. So how the promotion, how the position of CEO or director or deputy director. So the principal post of this particular anchor bank, what is the ratio or proportion by which it should be given? What is the seniority to be taken? What is a salary package? All the merged banks are having different salary packages, even though all these banks are coming under the banner of public sector banks. The pension scheme are different. The salary package is different. The seniority will be adversely affected. The position will be adversely affected. Designation will be adversely affected. The promotion strategy, the promotion policy will be adversely affected. Unless otherwise we strictly plan this merger and acquisition, this may lead to very, very severe human resource management problems in the public sector banks. Also, we find that there is violation taking place. The violations of the rules and regulations and banking norms that are expected to be implemented. See, the rules and regulations that are expected to be implemented by the banking sector is knowingly or unknowingly violated dominantly in the public sector banks on account of political influence or interference. The high incidence of NPA reporting in public sector bank is mainly due to the political inference. The banking officials will not be given the freedom of regulating their lending policies. They are at the mercy of the political leaders or politicians. They have to provide loans and advances even without complying with the regulatory mechanisms or formalities. That may lead to high level of incidence of impact. So the political influence still continue. And again, we have to remember that even after the consolidation, there is a policy that number of ATMs or bank branches will be closed down. Just consequent to the consolidation of SBI with the other 6 banks plus Bharatiya Mahila Bank, the number of SB branches closed were 5,000 in rural and remote area. Not only that, there can have a rural and urban divide on account of a digital divide. Doesn't mean that there are problems only with respect to the consolidation process. If we are handling the situation very effectively, if you are taking the timely precautions or required precautions that are to be followed for regulating or monitoring and controlling the whole merger and acquisition process, we can convert the same of this acquisition process into a blessing. How it is made possible? This can be made possible by means of having clarity with respect to the merger and acquisition. There's a proper vision, proper plan, proper policy, identify the core competencies, measure the synergies expected from. So what are the particular, say, responsibilities or what are the particular, say, interest of the society which are to be protected for, which are the areas where we can expand our banking operations, what are the core competencies of the merged banks, what are their thrust areas of operation, what are the thrust areas of funding, providing the finance to agriculture sector, or say industrial sector, or MSME, or say tertiary sector, like that, so that synergy expected on account of the M&A is to be systematically evaluated and listed out. So again, we have to consider the merger and acquisition only by having proper study with respect to the views and opinions and reviews of the stakeholders of the banks, like depositors, borrowers, shareholders, supervisors, employees. If we have made the discussions at series of stages with the stakeholders like depositors, borrowers, shareholders, supervisors, employees, which will identify what are the SOC, what are the strength, weakness, opportunities, and challenges of this M&A, then this individual bank's performance can be empowered or increased. The weaker banks which were being merged with the stronger banks can be converted into stronger banks. Earlier we found that. See, the weaker banks position may be transmitted to the stronger banks if the merger and acquisition has not taken place as per the systematic way it has to take place, in consultation and discussion, by identifying the strength, weakness, opportunity, and challenges of each of the merged banks and the anchor banks, we can go very nicely. And recently, with respect to the consolidation or merger process, an advisory board was being created called Bank Board Bureau, Triple B. Bank Board Bureau has been created, and we can seek the advice and directions of this Bank Board Bureau besides the discussions or critical or rational evaluation of the core competencies or synergies or the policies or the visions or plans of the anchor bank and the merged banks. We can proceed successfully even though problems are there. The service and functioning of the public sector banks may be made at the greater interest of the chunk of the people of the nation. And see, with respect to the CRAR, we have to consider what is the increased rate. So on account of the merger, see, the Tier 1 capital on 31st March 2019 it was 9.9%, on 31st March 20 it was 10.4%, and Tier 2 2.3%, then after that 2.5%. Altogether, the capital adequacy ratio, or CRAR, capital to risk weighted assets, was 12.2 on March 31st, 2019 and 12.9 on March 31st, 2020. As against the required 11.5. That means we are in a better position on account of this merger and acquisition. We can march towards a success as we have succeeded in fulfilling the capital adequacy ratio above the stipulated required one. Then what is the future? What is our prospects? What is our expectation? Even though merger is there, even though the acquisition has taken place, even though we are created bigger banks by merging a large number of small banks into bigger banks, we should not ensure the success of bigger banks. The chances of collapsing a bigger bank is very high. We have to remember, see, that fraudulent activity of securitization that took place in USA in 2008 collapsed the entire economy of the globe as a whole. So collapse or destruction of the larger banks will be leading to large consequences. Therefore, it is better to have good banks rather than big banks or small banks. Then what are good banks? Good banks are those banks which can fulfill or satisfy the basic financial parameters as prescribed by the global banking institution agencies. But it doesn't mean that what is the ideal or optimum size of a business banking company. So far, no study has been made as to the optimum ideal size of a banking company, whether it is big or small. It is optimum or not. That is to be obtained. That is to be identified. That optimum size of the banking company can be decided only on the basis of the selected financial parameters that has been launched by the global banking companies. And again, we have to remember the threat of, say, reducing the banking operations of even the global strategically important banks lead to the tightening regulatory mechanisms. Always we should be very, very careful as to, just a minute, just ഞാനൊരു മീറ്റിംഗിലാണ്. 2:30 എത്താമല്ലോ. വരുന്നു, ഷുവർ വരും. 2:30. ഓക്കെ, 2:30 we will come, definitely. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. It was called from a VC. Very sorry. Again, see, with respect to the lending policy, we need to have political neutrality. So who are the political parties, in which state or at the national level there will be influence. We cannot overcome that influence of the political parties. So if we are, say, very specific as to successful functioning of the banking institutions, the banking people strictly adhere the rules and regulations of internal mechanism or governance. They should not consider the political interference. Also, we have to strengthen the internal supervision and mechanism, and it is very, very important that the incidence of non-performing assets is to be reduced. So even after the mergers and acquisition, we can find that all these banks are product centric. They are offering their own tailored product. These products are not developed or initiated on the basis of the requirements of the consumers. So the products, earlier it was bank centric, now it is product centric, but the shift should be from product centric to consumer centric. So what is the requirement or expectation of the consumers that is to be considered? That I will tell you what it is. That is called consumer centric. So in future, we have to have the idea that there may not have any banks, but there will be banking. Banking will be there, but banks may not be there. We cannot surely say that after 5 years or 10 years, how many of the banks will be existing in India? See, especially at the global level, we have to consider the emergence of the new concept like open banking. Open banking is emerging in Japan or America or UK or developed countries. Open banking facility is put in practice, but in India, it is not being implemented so far. But in the coming future, as a result of the development of numerous numbers of applications, named mainly Application Program Interface, API. Application Program Interface will replace the present UPI, Unified Payment Interface. The present app UPI prevailing in India may be sometimes replaced by the Application Program Interface. That is an essential component of the open banking, wherein the products will be consumer centric. How the products will be consumer centric? See, when a consumer opens an account or a customer opens an account with a banking company, the entire transactions or financial credibility or financial health of the individual is known to the banking company. So with the consent or permission of the banking company, this data can be provided to other agencies who are ready with the application program interface. If the consent or approval of this particular consumers are given to the banking company for sharing their financial data to the API, this API will take the facility of providing all the services. It means that if a consumer approaches a banking company for a housing loan, the bank not only provide the housing loan, but it will provide all the services with respect to the intermediaries, with respect to the engineers, with respect to the architects, with respect to the construction building from A to Z. The entire requirements of a consumer will be satisfied by the banking institution, which offer the credit by transferring or by giving the financial data of the consumer with the permission of the consumer to the API. The entire services expected by the consumer is fulfilled. This service can be defined as consumer-centric service. And not only that, as we have fear that in the coming future, physical currency may not exist. So in most of the countries, digital currency is implemented. In India also, we are thinking of central bank digital currency. So the last Indian banker has the special issue of central bank digital currency. So we can think of how the cost of printing the currency can be eliminated. And this system of digital currency can be implemented in a country like India only when there is no digital divide. Apps are available, applications are available, access to the different financial applications are easy or equitably available to the citizens of the nation, whereby the financial inclusion can be ensured among the entire people of the nation. Thank you.
Yes, Professor. So we are very much thankful to you for a wonderful and informative talk, nearly 1.5 hours, problems and prospects of merger and acquisition of public sector banks in India. Participants.
Yes, they can ask the queries.
Yeah, you can clarify. One more sessions we have.
Yes, I know.
Before valediction.
Before the validity session, one more session is there.
Yeah,
so I was in fact running to keep up the time. The lunch is to be served by, but still some sort of queries can be made. Ganesha Murthy sir, coordinator, additional coordinator of the program. Yes. Dr. Ganesh Murthy is visible to me. I can see you, sir.
Sir, good afternoon, sir.
Okay, good afternoon. Very good afternoon, sir. So, any queries or clarification can be addressed now? Yes. Sri Venkateswaran is also seen.
Yeah, directly move to sum up. Then we have to because we have to rush up this another session.
Sir, I expect 1 or 2 questions. If any participants are ready to raise some questions, it will be nice. It will be encouraging and motivating. So, okay, it's up to you to decide. Yes, okay.
Sir, good afternoon, sir. Myself, Dr. Ganesha Murthy, Assistant Professor in the Department of Corporate Stewardship.
You are the additional coordinator of this session.
Deputy coordinator, sir.
Good.
Fine, sir. I want a general question, sir, for presenting today topic, problem and perspective. During the COVID-19 last 2 years, the banking service sector performing the service is very difficult. In this situation, as a stakeholders, what are the problem as arise?
Okay. Say the COVID-19
important problem, sir.
COVID-19 is not known to India alone. It is applicable to the whole world. But despite this particular COVID pandemic situation, when you have seen that, say, Q1, Q2, Q3 profit of the public sector banks, there was a great increase. And a sizable increase was there. And not only that, with respect to digitalization of the banking process, almost all the people, even the uneducated people, were ready to install and make use of the apps. So there was a shift in the mindset of the people as to we may not be able to continue with the ordinary conventional traditional banking services unless service we are modernize or change. So connectivity is the most important factor in India in the era of this COVID, especially a country like India where there is diversity in everything, in food habits, dressing habits, say educational nature, say employment nature, everything. There is a vast differentiation is there. So if that differentiation is prevailing even during the COVID period with respect to the connectivity, this will be the great hardship for the people of the India. And at the same time, awareness, intentional awareness program regarding the banking services, financial inclusion, financial literacy, financial knowledge need to be invariably imparted to the people at the nook and corner of the country to overcome this pandemic situation and to familiarize and go ahead with their banking services at large.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, the service provide all the literate or illiterate people, but the unknown, the technology by the illiterate people not adopt new technologies.
Even myself may not be able to make use of the apps that is available in the bank website.
They are not ready to adopt new technologies.
Yes, yes.
So that is why it's affected service and everything, sir.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for presentation, wonderful presentation, sir, on behalf of the department. Thank you very much, sir.
So, shall I leave?
Yes, sir. Please wait.
So, it's over. Program is over. Is it, sir?
Wait, sir. So, on behalf of this department, that Professor P. Johnson has narrated and discussed their valuable contributions, starting with the performance of public sector banks, reduction of public sector banks from 27 to 12 in the year 2021, and then why this reduction is taking place. Is it due to for LPG, or it is for demonetization or digitalization, or it may be for has to be explained for the list of public sector banks, the relevance of public sector banks, and then NBA management systems, and the calculation of provisionary ratio, and prudential norms, Basel norms for the risk management classifications, and CRA calculations, and selection of financial performance of the banks, and then GSIPS, that is global systematically important banks, and then 4 merged banks for detailed discussions for the distribution of the APMs and public sector banks, the pros and cons, that is what is say problems and prospects, and precautions and preventions. Finally, they head forward. So the way forward, that way has to be, calibrations from starting with the end is excellent one. Many of the participants, they have to be checkmarks, nice presentation, excellent presentation. All credit goes to Professor P. Johnson. On the behalf of the Department of Corporate Secretary, the portal of Alavapa University, really thankful to you, sir, for spending your valuable times on this portal. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I am.
Sir, one doubt.
Yes, Saravani.
Sarvani. Yes, sir. Sir, is there any other committee like Narasimhan committee? Is there any other committee suggested to consolidate all the banks which were consolidated now?
See, when we are examining the history of the banking services, number of committees were created from time to time. So different committees are established for suggesting number of modifications. There is not any lack of suggestions or recommendations or committees. The problem comes as to how it is being implemented neutrally. There's a problem. See, with respect to every banking company having a minimum capital, they need to have an internal supervisory mechanism. Despite prevailing this internal supervisory mechanism, theft and fraud take place. I'm not taking much of your time. Okay. Anyhow, thank you very much for the patient listening from all the participants, and I thank the particular Alagappa University department for having invited me as a resource person to this wonderful FDP program. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Participants, that last sessions you have 2:30, and you assembled on this portal 2:25 p.m. Thank you.